everyone here today. My name is Patrick Wheeler, and I work here at the Center for Digital Strategies, for those that don't know me. This year we're focusing our year-long RIP Technology Impact Speaker Series on digital transformation and digital business models. And along with the Tough Design Club, we thought this would be a great opportunity to host the folks from Frog to talk about a particular aspect of that user experience and design and thinking, and explore that topic from that lens. You know, it's no longer just okay to have a product or have a company that works. It's functional, right? Design and experience are a critical component to success in today's digital world. So, thrilled to have Patrick Kalaher, Annie Hsu T’11 for us from Frog, and that I'll turn it over to Annie and Patrick.
Great. Hi. Thank you so much for coming. You guys are such a big audience. I'm really impressed to see so many people here. I have to tell you a small little anecdote. When I was here 5 years ago, I'm a T'11. I said I wanted to go into design, and all of my wonderful friends were like, and this is a real company. This is a real thing. We solve real business problems. And so I'm really excited to see a lot of you here and be really excited. So Patrick's going to control most of this discussion. I'll be here for questions and to kind of add some color and anecdote, but with that, I will hand it over to Patrick.
Usually I'm the first one to drop an F-bomb.
Sorry.
But then I remembered it's Annie. So my name is Patrick Kalaher. I graduated from Dartmouth almost 25 years ago, and I'm currently living in exile in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I work at Frog. Who has heard of Frog? Who has no idea what Frog is? Okay, I have 40 slides that are going to give you the. No, I'm not going to do that. So, we're a design and innovation company. We've been around for about 45 years. Started in the Black Forest of Germany. There are many different etymologies of the word frog. That's Friedlin, our mascot. What I'm going to try to do is give you a perspective. I know you guys have been talking a lot about design thinking and how it impacts business and product design and service design and so on and so forth. I'm going to give a personal perspective, and I'm particularly going to zoom in on the topic of experience strategy. So before we get going, okay, put your hand up if you've heard of design thinking. Okay, put your hand, no, keep them up. Good, real followers here. Put your hand down if you are a newbie in design thinking and have a medium or expert level of understanding. Keep your hand up if you're an expert in design thinking and, okay, good. All right, good. Depending on how many people keep their hands up, it's how much I can get away with. So what I'm going to do, we have about 55 minutes or so. I'm going to try to keep this to 35, 40 minutes. I'm going to talk through how we think about something called experience strategy. And there are lots of different frameworks for thinking about design and business and how they intersect and so on. The way Frog thinks about it is experience strategy is part of the evolving role of design in the way that we create things in the world. And I'm going to avoid words like business because I think there are lots of things that might be considered business at one moment, and at another point they're a social movement, et cetera, et cetera. I'm particularly going to talk about experience strategy because I think it's one of the things that's at the core of the transformation that we're seeing. People talk about software eating the world. They talk about digital business models. I'm going to make the argument, and I want to hear you guys disagree with me if you don't think so, that experience strategy is behind what's really going on here. We're going to come back to this at the end, and we can talk about how these things interrelate. But my motivation today was really a journey that started back before the singularity. And I'll explain what the singularity was. So experience strategy, as far as Frog is concerned, is the choreography of interactions between people, products, and services over extended periods of time. Okay, you don't have to memorize this because we're going to come back to it, but it's really about the way people are relating to products and services and things over extended periods of time. Not just what we used to call hero moments, but as things extend through time. All right, so before I worked at Frog, I worked as a programmer and a systems architect, and I got into a particular brand of management consulting, which was where we would go and we'd go to a client and they'd say, we're not being efficient enough, we're not moving fast enough, we're not being competitive enough. So this is one of these aha moments that I had in 2007, just before everything went crazy in 2008, and it was a client of ours in Japan who said, we need to bring new products to market. We need to make new microscopes faster. We need to, because our competition is killing us, and we need to go faster. So that's what we did. We figured out, we said, I went to Yamagishi-san at the end of the project and said, okay, we can make this, your product development lifecycle go faster, but your customers aren't buying microscopes anymore, right? And this was a big moment for me, and I didn't have words for it at the time. But what was easy for me to understand what was really going on is that scientists, in this case we're talking about microscopes used for cytology and highly technical medical imaging. Scientists and doctors just want images of things. Microscopes are the things from the time of von Leeuwenhoek until the 21st century. They were the convenient way in which we obtained those things. But this company that I was working for at the time was in the business of making microscopes. So this was a problem. Because the customers really wanted 4 things that they'd traditionally gotten from other places. And this had started to really muck up what the microscope business was. Things like image acquisition and manipulation, storage, collaboration, and software to aid in the workflow. Say if you're doing cancer research and you're trading images back and forth with researchers all over the world, you need to do this in a different way. So this was kind of problematic because this was a company who'd prided itself on its ability to craft the best lenses in the world. So we said, look, you're actually in the imaging business and in the software business along with lots of other companies, and this is problematic. So our client at the time said, all right, what am I going to need to do to be good at this, right? How am I going to make this work? So I'm not going to tell you exactly what happened with that story, but I am going to give you some different stories that explain what people are doing today. At Frog, what we try to do is help our clients look at something that's really important to be good at this sort of thing, which is to focus on the experience. In the universe of all the possible technology and processes and organizational changes you can make, you need to step back and think about the experience that your customer and people who have even passing acquaintance with the things that you offer what they're experiencing. So I'm going to give you 3 examples from the present. I'm going to ask you questions. I'd like you guys to interact. I think we're past the initial wave of pizza, so you guys probably don't have full mouths. So first thing so you'll be able to speak up. First thing I'm going to talk about is the garbage can, right? What can be done to improve the experience of the garbage can? Well, there's a company in Newton, Massachusetts. Who's heard of these guys? Big Belly Solar, right? So they had a broken one outside my office. And I became fascinated with these guys because this is kind of this is a digital business, right? It's essentially what they do is they take different kinds of garbage and they compress it, and they can hold up to 5, sometimes up to 7 times as much rubbish in the can at the same time as a similarly sized can. And they can also, instead of relying on the trash companies to come once a week and empty the trash, they can phone home and say, I'm full, and come pick me up now. So the first impression I have here is this is kind of cool, but it doesn't really change the core experience that the person dropping the garbage in the bin has. They're still going to just do that. And I actually have a whole, I've done a lot of research into how these things break because that's one of the fascinations that I have. And in fact, there are a lot of breakpoints in here, but the real value add of something like this is actually not in the experience of the person dropping the garbage off in the parking lot or at the end of at the ballpark. It's actually what happens if this thing goes left to right. It's actually what happens after you put the garbage in there. It's about a step change in the experience that the municipal waste collection and recycling people have over time. For that product to be successful, the experience they have to give to those people has to change in a very big way. Not everybody's up to that. So that's one thing where you can, on the surface level, think that it's not about changing the user experience, but maybe this is. Who has seen this? I have a little bit of schadenfreude in me, and I like to go and look at Kickstarters and other sorts of interesting smart products. The idea behind Bruno is it's reinventing the experience of getting rid of your trash, right? So you don't have to bend over. You don't need to remember if you took the trash out. You just tell your phone. You also don't need to remember if you have bags or not because you can tell your phone. And everything gets taken care of it. It's plugged into the wall. There's a little vacuum that pulls it in there and sorts it out for you. And one of the problems with this is, how many people would buy this product? Okay, you'd buy that product. What's interesting to you about it? Sure. So that's good, and I mean I like the way they've depicted that, right? But what happens when the power's out? What happens about how do you clean the inside of it? What happens if you forget to tell the phone that you've taken the garbage out or not? How does that integrate with all the other calendaring and digital experiences you have? What are we really doing to fundamentally improve the experience of taking the trash out? What was wrong with, as a lot of my industrial designer colleagues would say, what was wrong with a dustpan and broom? It's something we've been working on for centuries, right? And I created my own tagline for Bruno. It's fixes problems you didn't know you had, creates new ones, right? So I'm not dissing these people. They raised their money, they shipped the product. It's great. I wouldn't buy one, but it makes you think about a lot of different elements that when you put a product out in the market, you have to start thinking about what some of the effects of that are on people's lives. I'm going to continue with the can theme here and talk about who knows what this is. Okay, what is it? Amazon Echo, right? And what's the product here? What's the offer? I heard someone say something about being able to order things. Connectivity, right? Well, what's interesting here, and is something that's been revealed over the last couple months, is that Amazon is not actually selling a device here, even though they charge money to early users. They're actually selling a service, and they're selling a service that actually mimics a lot of the back-end experiences in their business, and they're just creating a time. They're filling in the gaps between the times when maybe your Apple Watch is being charged, your phone might be off, and you want to know what the weather's like tomorrow, or you want to know if you can order you can order spare parts for your broken Bruno garbage can, right? You want to be able to do that, and what they've done is they filled that in. They don't actually care that much about the physical experience. I don't know if you guys saw this. This was from a couple months ago. A guy in the UK. This is a $10 CHIP computer. The recipe was put up on GitHub, and Amazon's actually come back with, you can take a Raspberry Pi first generation, and with a couple little accessories you can buy at an electronics store or buy off Amazon, you can actually create your own Echo service, right? They don't actually care about the physical part of this. They care only about the overall experience and how that fits into your understanding of Amazon over time and the shifting services that are there. And so let me ask you a couple questions. How do these three different digital experiences make you feel, right? What do they have in common? And what are they part of? These are more or less rhetorical questions. But I want you to think about that, because one of them is something where the end user experience doesn't change that much, but it's actually about a transformation of an entire a promised transformation of an entire set of municipal systems and supply chain. The second one is about something that is maybe a bit of an edge case and a bit of a sort of a bi-coastal bourgeois problem. And the third one is about rounding out a pretty interesting set of services that have been in development for 20 years now, right? And I would argue that that the more successful of these are actually built to make the transition from a relatively structured, hardwired, built-to-last set of businesses to a set of dynamic and destined to change businesses and experiences, right? So ask yourself, of the three examples I gave that I carefully selected, which of these are going to be able to adapt to the future more easily, right? I mean, the cheating answer is that Amazon seems like they're doing a great job because they don't even care what kind of device you use to access their services, and if there's a new one next week, so much the better. Throw this one away or send it back and get something else. So this is because Amazon has understood, and a lot of other companies understand, that people have newfound levels of freedom to engage with products and services and experience over time. And that really, this is about, when it's done correctly, this is about opportunities to create new kinds of relationships, right? And this is a scary thing. And so many companies, because they're hanging on to the way that they've done business and been successful for so many years, actually create situations where customers and bystanders feel fragmented and feel disconnected from those things. Nothing worse than calling up your cable supplier and they don't know as much as you know. You go into Best Buy. One of the reasons why I believe Best Buy has problems is you can walk in with your iPhone and know more about the product than the person in the room with you, right, who's trying to sell it to you. And so the question is, how do you align these things together, and what do you do to meet these changing expectations? And how do you deliver a cohesive experience? So The other thing that you have to think about too is that none of these things exist by themselves. I've been at Frog for 6 years, and the first couple of years that I was there, we struggled with the idea that a lot of our clients were trying to create digital products as if it was the only thing that a customer was using. They forgot about social networks. They forgot about other devices that compete for your attention. We were talking about, Airbnb and hotels, and are Airbnb and hotels competing? Or, hotels may never see the loss of it, but people might just stop staying there, and they might not understand why. So these challenges require a bunch of different perspectives and a bunch of different ways to think about these, what we call choreographed product and service experiences. So, and one more thing I want to say before we move on to the next section is that my colleague Richard Tyson and I have been calling this process and where we're headed over the long run what we call big design. And this is signaled in many industries, in many cases, by the shift of value away from individual devices out to a larger context. So I brought with me, I was involved in the beta testing. Frog has done a bunch of work for Disney over the years, and we've been re-engineering the in-park experience, the NGE they call it. And so this is, you can get fixated on what this device is, and we sweated the details on this. There's 2 RFID radios in it. We thought about how it fits people, so on and so forth. But it turns out that that's just a necessary thing that drives a larger experience that's actually about orchestrating a lot of different parts, some of which you can control and some of which you can't. So I want to talk to you about some imperatives for experience strategy. So let's return back to that definition again. Let's talk about how we create those interactions and how we can try to guide them. Okay. Now I'm not a designer. I'm a physicist, so I think about things a little bit differently. But we're all invited to the design thinking party. And so what I'm going to talk about are things that actually are not about the thing themselves or the service themselves. They're about the way that you create them and the way you deploy them. Right, and how you do those things. And so I'm going to spend the next couple minutes talking about what I think of as 3 imperatives of experience strategy. 3 things you should do or not do that are going to make a difference in the way that you design the thing that you're making. Okay? So the first thing, don't just make things. And this might sound pedantic, but it's really important to think about, to be careful about this. So in the 20th century and in the early part of the 2000s, this was a pretty standard thing. I wouldn't be surprised if you were learning this sort of product lifecycle in your classes here. The first thing you do when you're thinking about the next generation of your product or service is you're saying, let's take a look at the history out here. What are the competitive products and services? And then let's go look at the voice of customer. Right? Let's go talk to people who use our services, people who use our product. What's wrong with it? How does it work? What's better about it? And you create a hypothesis that says, okay, we want to make n+1 of this smart device, and somebody in this room is going to say, well, the market says that you should do this because there's this kind of business model, and the X device business model is like this, and it's changing in some way, and so we should or shouldn't make a thing, right? You could have a decision point here to say the total addressable market is big enough, it's not big enough, this is competitive, it's not competitive, so let's go and do that thing. Let's go make another one of these, right? We're in the tire business, let's make another tire. The problem comes in when you say there's no existing market for the thing we're doing. Maybe it's not directly competing with anything, or maybe this is a left turn from the things we've done before. And then you ask yourself, well, can we and should we? There seems to be demand for the thing we're doing, but this isn't something we're very good at. And if we make one of these things, we really don't know how to sell this to customers and what they expect of us. And so a lot of companies who are trying to make this transition stop here because they can't do something very simple like this. It says the market indicates we need to go and sell this widget at 20% lower, or we need to make it faster, like the example I gave with the microscopes. So companies get stopped here. So the imperative about not making a thing I'll give you is something that is important to think about is is the concept of creating experiences. And this may sound a little bit fluffy to people who aren't used to thinking in terms of design thinking, but the way that we would think about the next generation of a product or a service would be to ask different questions. We'd say, okay, there are these things out in the market today. There are hotel rooms out in the market. There are B&Bs, et cetera. there are garbage cans. But we're going to go out and we're going to look at what people have been doing. You notice that I don't say we're going to go look at the previous generation of products, but we're going to go and look around this proximity and we're going to say, what are people doing that's either a substitution for this, that's an advancement of it, that's a complete denial of the existing generation of things. And then we're also going to go out and do some social listening, and we're going to say, what do networks say about this? What do our suppliers say? What do our downstream customers and distributors say? How are they feeling about this, and what's the sense about what's going to work and not going to work? And then instead of asking the question, saying we think and therefore we should make a thing, or asking yourself if you should or shouldn't make a thing, it's ask yourself, what could we be to our customer? What is the role we're playing in their life? And then people put language around this all the time about getting out in beta, about putting things out and adapting. But what we at Frog think about is doing experiments to understand behavior, either getting prototypes out in front of customers or actually creating full-blown product and putting it out and seeing what happens. The Amazon Echo example is there. I don't know that Amazon knew that its most ardent customers are the teenage and adolescent girls in the homes of people with Echoes. They love these things. I don't know that they could ever have gotten that from a set of focus groups of their top Amazon buyers, but this seems to be like the vector that's actually getting things into people's homes. And so taking those experiments and then adapting and iterating through this is the way to think about this from an experience strategy perspective. And I'll give you some examples from the recent past. You guys, who had a Wii, has a Wii, right? So great, the business case on this is great because it's it was the previous generation silicon from the previous Nintendo product, and they didn't, Sony and Microsoft were coming out with all kinds of new, using Moore's law to bring out the best, the newest stuff, and Nintendo went back and said, there's this problem. A healthy minority of people out there are not using video games. Why? Because probably 30% of the people in this room either don't like or can't use a two-handed controller. And so what they said was, let's go and create a one-handed controller, and let's create games that appeal to people who can only use one hand. And for those of us who have been gaming all my life, right, I don't understand this, but a lot of people feel this way. Right? So they got two benefits here. They got to go after the people who can't game two-handed, and they can use their existing R&D, and their existing chipsets. But this asking the question, what can we be to those people, actually created some really neat effects here. They went off and they became in their generation of video game console, they were the #1 seller by a wide stretch, because they captured all these casual gamers. There's an interesting correspondence between people who can't game two-handed and people who are casual gamers. And also, they ushered in the concept of 3D control and gesture, right? So Microsoft and Sony came out with things that were way better and all that stuff, but by that time, the game was over, right? This was an experience strategy way of looking at things. They took some of the limitations and they said, what can we be? We can be the game for people who don't buy games today. And then what they learned as they developed the games was, oh yeah, there's all this really cool stuff we can do around gesture and 3D control that we hadn't thought about before. This wasn't actually in their plan at the beginning. It just was a necessary byproduct. This is one of the things that's on our website. We created this in our Shanghai studio. It's a product called Airwaves. And this is very much the design nerd's idea of virtual reality, right? So the idea behind this product is, and I've worn it, and it's not, it's not an unpleasant experience. The idea here is that you get a couple different you get some feedback here. You get a digital filter that analyzes the air coming in and out of you. You get a heads-up display. You get all kinds of interesting data about the world around you, so on and so forth. But this is a thing-based design. This was someone saying, what could we do to make a cool-ass virtual reality experience? But we know that virtual reality is not that cool yet, right? And this guy Palmer Luckey is the guy who created Oculus Rift, like probably an extremely smart person and really cool. I'm sure he's going to be living this down for the rest of his life. But you know, the question is, you know, what do you do with this thing? Well, I would argue it's very interesting that these sorts of things exist, because getting these early experiments out, the fact that Facebook bought Oculus and is now sort of progressing it, the fact there's Google Cardboard, et cetera, it's actually led to a bunch of really interesting lessons from experience that have made people adopt different strategies. So what I've got here is, who has seen this work about, so the story here is that people who are seriously burned, whether it's from war or whether it's from some tragedy in their life, have to get their bandages changed really frequently. Yeah, Annie, do you want to talk to this a little bit?
Sure. So the story here is that as you're a serious burn victim, you have to get your bandages changed every single day, and it's a extremely long and pretty painful process. So you're in a facility, they actually fill kind of this hospital bed with water, and so you're wet, you're laying down, it takes multiple hours, it's extremely painful, and often young children are very frequent visitors to the burn center, and they have to constantly ask for more opiates to kill the pain. And so there was a study done that was trying to understand the value of distraction therapy in decreasing the need for opiates during this process. And we actually have a medical resident from Stanford who's located with us in San Francisco for a year, really passionate about design, really passionate about understanding what types of solutions design plus healthcare could bring.
Right.
And he's got close connections with the Burn Center in Santa Clara. And so what we're doing in our San Francisco studio, along with our technologists, our interaction designers, our visual designers, is we are actually prototyping a virtual reality set that's specific to this situation. Number one, it needs to be able to get wet, right? The current Oculus Rift can't get wet. The Google Cardboard can't really get wet. And so we've actually taken activity play mats for babies, cut those up, kind of fit them together like puzzle pieces, purchase the actual materials from Amazon to kind of make the virtual reality technology work within this context. And then we're also designing a game that is specific to the constraints of being in a bed when your bandages are being changed. So you've got limited head range, you've got limited sort of movement, and there are also these ideas of just cool imagery, just a cold imagery actually help you during that process. So is it a snowball fight? Like, is it about like soaring through the air? Is it about space? And so our designers, in conjunction with our medical resident, are exploring all these new ideas to be able to reduce the amount of opiates that are actually required to go through this process and make that experience much more tolerable one, I would say.
Exactly. So this is a very experience strategy-driven approach, because if you think about it, I'm sure Palmer Luckey and the people from Oculus weren't thinking about this set of use cases, but it turns out that this is the sort of thing when there are examples in the market. We started off by prototyping with Google Cardboard, and we've actually gone and created our own versions of of the experience, created our own software, and so on and so forth. Getting out there, experimenting, and figuring out what this product can be for people is the way that we see going forward. Because there wasn't someone in Sand Hill Road saying, I want to invest in VC for burn victims, but this may turn out to be a very big thing. So I'll just recap on creating experiences. You know, the idea here is when you're building new products and services, ask yourself what needs and desires are we trying to address. Understand the impact of those new technologies, like the example we gave you with VR and burn victims, and then feed that back through. Because this may be a silly example from Kickstarter of an LED sweater for dogs, but who knows where that's actually going to go and what use that's going to actually have. And those experiments are really important. So anchor points are an interesting thing. We talk about the virtualization of everything. I'm going to make a counter argument. You've got most of us have an anchor point in our pocket, right? That in these experiences, there are certain things you have to take for granted, or you have to be able to build off of, whether they're physical or digital or both. This is a project I was involved with. Does anyone know what this is? Okay. This is the GE compressed natural gas in a box. And essentially what this is solving a really interesting problem. This is a set of prefab infrastructure that fits in the back of half of a shipping container. And this problem it solves is standard distribution of compressed natural gas to consumers, mostly business consumers. Why? Why is that necessary? Well, there are a lot of imperatives and there are a lot of mandates in urban transport to say that they need to move off of gasoline and diesel to compressed natural gas. And the problem was that not having fast filling natural gas meant that buses and other sorts of vans and so on that run on these couldn't be scheduled reliably, right? So putting this anchor point of the CNG in a box it solves an immediate problem. It says that in Philadelphia, for example, they can actually start to fast fill buses every night and with a 95% certainty that all of them are going to be ready the next morning. Before they couldn't do it. But this is just one of a set of things that happens when you create a successful anchor point. One is you can start, the people using that product or service, in this case, people running buses and van schedules, can start taking these things for granted. They can start relying on them. You can also start creating interfaces, whether they're interfaces for gas or whether digital interfaces. You can create those, and people can start relying on those as well. Similarly, you can start to create additional services that you can slipstream through those anchor points, right? And in this case, GE also owns what's called a forecourt company. They're the people who do all the stuff when you're having a road trip and you get out of your car and you stumble in and they have all that junk food. That's a GE company, right? So they can start bundling those together and distributing those in a similar way. And so part of thinking about your experience strategy is asking yourself, what are my anchor points? What am I doing to anchor the experience? And it isn't always the biggest piece of equipment. It could be other things. So I'm going to give you an example from some work we did. This is now called Liquid Palo, and I'm going to play this here. So this is something that we designed a couple years ago, and it's now going into production. And essentially, it was to initially answer the question, what do we do? This was from Mayor Bloomberg at the time. What do we do to fill up the spot where all the phone booths are? Because if you've ever seen a New York City phone booth nowadays, it's not a pretty sight, right? People use it more for year-end deposits than anything else. But the government actually has to provide certain services, and by law, they actually have to provide telephone services. So the question they asked us was, what do we do about this, and how do we think about that? And we said, well, one of the ways to think about this is not just think about the regular daily stuff that you're doing, but think about what happened with Hurricane Sandy. Think about the fact that when commercial digital services go down, what do people do, right? When your phone doesn't work anymore, or when electricity is gone, how do you communicate with people? How do you think about local communication and a sense of place with those things? This and a whole bunch of other things were sort of behind the way we thought about this. And as we developed and prototyped this product, we thought about it. We thought about all the different things that a physical presence on the street corner could actually do. And this has actually been productized. If you look on our website, you can see more about it. It does the original things. It does fire. It does police. It actually, can get cabs for you, I guess, in case Uber's not available. That's how you can tell this was done in 2013 or 2014. But here's an example of an anchor point, right? It's a thing that by necessity needs to be there, and so there's lots of different things we can put there, right? And like I said before, you can start doing things like you saw in the movie there. You saw about how you could start integrating, in this case, actually integrating this into people's schedules, understand the interfaces that it provides, not only to the city but also to the businesses around it. Thinking about the services that could be slipstreamed into this experience, and then thinking about what else can be distributed along with it, right? Okay, last one. And this one is an interesting one because this is a little bit indirect, and it's been a big topic lately. The question is, we want to make a transformation from a 20th century company, or we're starting up and we're growing really fast. How do we best organize ourselves to create the best possible experiences for our customers, right? And it used to be really easy. People who can't read the bottom, do you guys know what this is? It's the New York and Erie Railroad org plan from 1865, right? And so the idea here is, organizations have always tried to echo the experiences or shape the experiences they create. In this case, the organizational structure of this railway actually just pretty much echoes the network that it maintained, right? And it's kind of beautiful, I think, but it's really interesting. And we've always been doing this. Who has seen this joke before, right? Is this really, you know what, I thought this was the original inspiration for this, and because we talk about this, and I decided that this was a really interesting, this is actually a lot more true than I think people give it credit for. So, you know, the joke is, right, that, okay, ask yourself which company is better organized to create the best experiences, who can go fastest and change existing ones. So, the famous one is, Microsoft. They have 11 divisions that make over $1 billion each, and I've worked with Microsoft. Has anyone here worked at Microsoft? You know, right? It's us or them, and this idea of working together, you know where the organizational boundaries are, right? Similarly, people who work at Oracle or use Oracle, right? There's this question of engineering being over here and then the legal team rushing in behind to make sure that the customer experience is assured. IT people get that, but and then this kind of chaos with Google, and it sort of looks like a 1999 web server farm, right? And then like this idea that is this really if Microsoft is a divisional format and Apple's a functional format, is that really true, right? So, and people are always thinking about these things. And Steven Sinofsky, who ran the Windows group for many years, used to say, "Don't ship the org chart." He used to say, "Don't let your customers see the seams in your business when they get the product." And then a guy named Melvin Conway, a famous mathematician and computer scientist, said, essentially, you always ship the org chart. It's inevitable, right? The idea here is that he was a pioneer in software design, and he said essentially every piece of software you deliver to somebody looks like exactly like the organization that designed it, and you can see the seams, right? It's inevitable. So this tension has always been there, right? Most recently, Google's actually gone and said, you know what? We're gonna figure all these little things out down here, and we're gonna pivot and change direction, but we're gonna pull back. And am I the only one that thinks that this was a funny joke when they came up with this name? Like, these are all a bunch of bets seeking alpha, right? And the idea is that that each of these was going to run, and deliver the best possible experience to its customers. And if one of these things needs to go away, it's going to go away, right? And then there's new ones are going to come in, and Sergey and Larry and everyone else are going to sit up here, and they're going to move the chess pieces, And they went off and they made some acquisitions and did some stuff. But this is a great strategy, except for the fact that if you've seen the news lately about Nest, right? They've failed to ship any products. I think they have the little guns pointing at each other inside, right? They bought Nest and they bought Dropcam, and they've been fighting ever since. Everybody went in. I do a lot of work in smart home and home automation. We're not afraid of these guys anymore. Nobody on the street is afraid of these guys. Well, we're afraid of Google, but we're not afraid of these guys, because they were like, the product's working fine, but what would be even better is if we retrofitted a new protocol in there called Thread. Are we going to change the customer experience? No, but it's going to make our efforts going forward more elegant, right? It's a better standard, et cetera. And if you guys want to talk about Z-Wave versus Zigbee versus Thread afterwards, come see me. Who knows what Valve is, right? You guys, who has spent most of their life playing Portal and Dota 2, and right? So Valve is yeah. My life is I live my life in a few different. I went from wasting all my time on my Intellivision to wasting all my time on Super Nintendo to wasting all my time on Civilization to wasting all my time playing Valve games. Anyways, so Valve is really interesting because they don't have an org structure. It's true. You can go and you can talk to them, and you can also see. So this is a really kind of funny thing. This is out of their employee handbook, and they say this is the official Valve org chart. There's Gabe Newell, who's the CEO, and there's everyone else. This is how, I don't know who Chet is, but apparently Chet doesn't fit. And then this is how other people see it, right? And you say, like, this is crazy. Why are they doing this? I mean, they're still doing really well. They're not accountable to anybody, and they're shipping really good products. And in their new employee handbook, which if you once your term is over, I encourage you to go download it and look at it, because you can Google it and download it. Hierarchy is great for maintaining predictability and repeatability. It simplifies planning and makes it easier to control a large group of people from top down, like a train company, right? A railroad. This is why military organizations rely on it so heavily. But when you're entertaining a company that spent the last decade going on its way to recruit the most intelligent, innovative, talented people, telling them to sit at a desk and telling them what to do obliterates 99% of that value. We want innovators, and that means maintaining an environment where they'll flourish. That's why Valve is flat. But one of the interesting things about this is they started this way, and they are this way, right? So as they've grown and as they've maintained their corporate structure, they've been able to make that happen. I know some of these people, and there's a little bit of, it's not an unalloyed good, because it's also plays to certain personalities, and certain types of people get more done than others. It doesn't, these intelligent, innovative, probably extroverted people are the ones that tend to thrive there. But that's one way of thinking about this. There's also been a lot of talk recently about holacracy. Do you guys, who has heard of holacracy before? Okay, sounds like a board game, but this is really interesting. I don't know a ton about this. All I know is from the people I know at Zappos and what they tell me, right? But the idea here is, like Valve, they don't have any specific hierarchy. What they do have is a set of circles, and they have a set of processes and a set of customs for thinking about how this works, right? And the sorts of meetings that actually make things clear. It's very interesting. I'm not an Amazon fanboy, but Jeff Bezos hates this, because he said meetings are, when you have a meeting, that means you failed. Because his idea is that if you haven't communicated clearly, that's why you get back together and meet. So if you communicate clearly up front, you shouldn't have to get together. The philosophy here is that people need to get together and talk, because they're constantly trying to, Zappos is famous for its customer service and its customer experience, so they're seeking after this. But they didn't start that way, right? This transition was done, less than a year ago, I think. And so they've lost about almost 20% now. I met with one of the heads of design at South by Southwest a couple weeks ago, and he was saying, this is one of these things that plays to certain personalities and it doesn't play to others, right? So it's not for everybody. And also, anytime you engage in any kind of organizational change on top of existing oral or formal tradition, you're going to have exodus of people. I don't know what their normal turnover was. Nobody has a clear idea what their base rate of turnover is. They're also owned by Amazon too, which is interesting. And then there's the one that everybody seems to love, right? This is the Apple org chart as of 2015. Some of the names have changed since then, but this is an interesting take on the functional org chart. If the Microsoft one is, you have 11 product lines, each with $1 billion worth of revenue, and they have different capabilities within those product lines. That the idea here is that you actually have yin and yang. You actually have two sides of you actually have the executive team here. On the left-hand side, you've actually got the sustaining functions. These are the people who keep the lights on. At Oracle, they'd be the legal team that goes back and cleans up for all the promises you made. And on the right-hand side are the people, you notice there's nothing here that says iPhone, right? Nothing here that says iPad or Apple Car. And the hope is that what you're doing is you're creating things by taking a stripe through each one of these circles and coming together as product teams to create a really innovative experience. And it gives the ability for the CEO to build and break those things as it fits the strategy of the company. And a lot of frogs and a lot of people I talk to think this is a really good way to do things. And it is pretty good, since it also has this one problem, right? What is Apple not doing yet? They haven't been prepared for when things aren't important. They shipped a watch because they needed to create an anchor point to go with the phone, because maybe you don't need your phone after a while. Maybe if the world goes the way of the Echo, and it's just a disembodied voice somewhere. Ask yourself, why is the Apple TV the way it is? Right? Why doesn't it have an Alexa type capability? Why can't you ask your Apple TV a Siri question? Right? You can't, I don't think. Mine doesn't. So they're trying to catch up here, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this very materials-oriented company, they're masters of supply chain and manufacturing, how they are able to adapt to these. So thinking about how you organize around your company for best experience strategy is actually a combination of looking at all these different examples from recent history and going back and saying, what is it that what's the best way for our company to adapt to these things? How do we make them work? There is no right answer here. It really depends. So these are the three imperatives for experience strategy that I wanted to talk about. and I hope you guys find other ones. All of this folds back into what we were saying before as part of an entire design thinking experience platform. Experience strategy is just one of many things, right? There's also, it's interesting too, these things overlap each other. So the way that you create an organization to foster creativity is different than the way you organize around creation and distribution of product and service. So, okay, so that was what I wanted to talk about today. It's Friedlin again. Any questions? Yes?
So I was looking at the New York City digital
Yeah.
posts, and I used to work in an agency and we did a lot of cool digital designs. Sometimes one of the frustrations of being in an agency is that they don't implement them.
Right.
So first question, are those things going to be in New York? Or the second question, how do you guys just wrap your heads around when your clients are like, we're like, great design, like, but we're not going to do it because it's too expensive, or, what's that dynamic like?
Well, I think so. So the Liquid Palo will be rolling out not in New York, but in another city, in a set of cities. It's LQD, PLO or PALO. So just get a Google alert for that, and you'll be able to see. I can't say. But you bring up a good question. Sometimes the answer to the question, what should we do, can be don't do it. Because I think design thinking and thinking experientially and experimentally like we do, we have a really cool poster of all the things that we thought were awesome but would never ship in a million years. And they're amazing, right? They're just they're design porn. They're fantastic things that for one reason, either the materials don't exist yet, computers aren't fast enough, they would cost too much, or there's gravity or something, right? Like there's lots of things that, right? There's lots of things that we'd love to do. And I don't necessarily think that's a failure. One of the things that's, I think, implicit in what I've been talking about here around design thinking is not being afraid to be wrong. And I'm not going to say fail fast, and I'm not going to say lots of other buzzwords from the last 20 years of business. What I want to say is experiment and adjust. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, like, you guys are willing to show cool products that you've developed, but like, is it really disappointing if you don't go to market?
Of course. Yeah, it is. It's what's interesting. It's mostly disappointing to people who want them. So I think I can talk about this now. So if I've done one thing in the last decade of my life, professionally, that I'm really happy about, is I was part of the team that convinced CVS to stop selling cigarettes. My mom died of lung cancer when I was a teenager. It's a long story, but one of the things we did when we designed the store of the future for CVS, like it or not, it's everywhere, on the East Coast in particular, was we tried to think about how this would improve people, particularly chronically ill people or people with chronic conditions like diabetes and treatable versions of cancer and so on and so forth. And they did many of the things that we asked them to do. But the people who worked in our design research, the people we interviewed, really wanted a lot more. And so I would say, as much as CVS wanted to do many of those things, and they're going to phase a lot of those things in, it's actually the disappointment not just of the designers and the thinkers, but actually the customers that I'm more worried about. But the good news is they learn language for expressing those things.
Yeah. Just to add also to what you're asking, I think it's always heartbreaking to pour your heart into something, put it out there, and have your clients say, oh my gosh, this is so amazing, but they may not have the organizational assets or capabilities to really deliver on those things. And you can kind of see by a lot of the models that Patrick talked about that it's not easy to suddenly change an organizational structure. And even if you change the structure, it might not change the culture that much, right? I think Google and Alphabet are kind of going through this now. Like, what does it mean that I'm in Alphabet and not Google? I don't know. I don't really feel that yet. I think the thing that we may underestimate at Frog is actually the guy in our group named Tim recently saw one of his clients at a dinner party or something, and he worked on a project, didn't really go anywhere, and he said, oh yeah, like, what was the aftermath of that? What happened? And she said, actually, even though we didn't deliver on that or see it through to fruition, it actually sparked a lot of great discussion and controversy, and it forced us to see ourselves better, and why can't we deliver on this? What are our failures? What do we need to change? What's the imperative?
Yeah.
Delivering this type of solution creates for us. And so in that way, I think you have to also think about what's the social currency and what's the value of putting an idea in front of someone who may not be ready for that idea.
That's true. And in this case, the company in question is still around, but barely. But a lot of the ideas have lived on. I mean, and once ideas are out there, I mean, that's the interesting thing about these. They gain currency pretty fast. And as Annie is saying, we can help affect people. Next question. Sorry. Yes?
I'd love to hear your thoughts on Slack, which was built basically as a thing, unlike a lot of the stuff that you had.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts about that. No, I spent 2014 in Germany much of the time. Okay, how much time do we have? So I created a product that did that got crushed by Slack. So what's that?
What's it called?
So it's called Circuit by Unify, right? And you guys may have tried to use it. We completely missed it. So Unify is formerly Siemens Telecom, Siemens Networks, and they're a multinational company. They came to us. We said, what do we do to compete in unified communications? Right? See how I'm framing up the problem? What do we do to get the voice experience of the future? And what do we do to leverage all these assets that we have? Right? And so we went and we did all the stuff that I'm talking about, and we did it in an extremely compelling way. We created some great technology and some good user experience. The point that we missed was that we weren't actually solving the problems as they're now being framed up. So I've only used Slack a little bit as a competitive product to see what it was like, but from what I can tell, it's tracking to the way that people are actually using things, and it's actually tracking very much. What was the headline in Fast Company last week or the week before? It was like, first we started using Slack, or something like we used Slack and now Slack's changing us, right? So there's some sort of interesting isomorphism with how people work. The edge case was developers working on using threaded discussion groups to solve problems, and that sort of, it turns out that's the way a lot of people are doing things. Is that the best way? I don't know. But what it obviated, what it completely marginalized, the thing we were working on was a 21st century voice-driven experience. I don't know about you, but I don't like it when people call me, right? I know, maybe some of you do, but so we were answering a different set of questions, and what I think Slack did is they forced the question, when it comes to unified communications, what are people really doing? What do they really want to do? And I think they probably approximated that better than anyone else. Is that your experience too, or?
Yeah, I think so. The interesting part to me with that is that it was sort of an engineering-driven startup that was designed by a design firm. It feels different when you use it.
Well, who knew that web first was the way to go? Like, we were all what we built was all for Android and iPhone and like. If I stood up here and told you to go web first, you'd tell me to leave, right? But that's what they did, right? Because that's how people are working on their workstation laptops, doing their job, and then you put the other experiences in front. So, who knows where that's going to go? Like Dropbox, I think it's one of these things where the bottom line looks pretty cool, but the top line, I don't know. Like they're getting a lot of customers, but how are they going to make money and drive the kind of value? I'm not sure. Next question? Yeah.
How do you think about selling to organizations who might see you in the kind of thing frame? In design firm, help us design a product, help us design. How do you kind of pitch to them to say, no, it's a lot deeper than that, it's about your organization, it's about the experience?
The best way to do that is through examples.
Right.
And so what we often do is, it can be challenging to say, you need to design for an experience. Like, what's that? Well, an experience is right. Dictionary definitions don't go so far, but what is an extremely powerful story is a story that Patrick alluded to, kind of breezed through early in his presentation, because it'd be easy to spend an hour on that, but it's an experience that we partnered with Disney to deliver against the My Magic Band. Has anybody actually been to Disney World and used a My Magic Band? Okay. How was it? Thumbs up?
Dangerous if it was connected to my credit card.
Yes.
What was it?
Dangerous because it was connected to my credit card, but really.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna buzz this everywhere.
Swipe.
Right, but it's this idea that the premise or the imperative question was, how do we make the experience better for guests and for people who are running and operating the park? And that actually the solution was a suite of solutions. It was a wearable, it was a set of applications that coupled with that wearable, it was turnstiles that you just buzzed into to really help park flow in the entrance. It was a whole series instead of things that happen in restaurants, in the hotel. And those types of stories are the ones that kind of speak the most directly and help companies see, oh my gosh, I can also understand how that might be me to my customer and whatever relationship that is. So I guess for me, it's been just show them what the possible is and help them dream about what that could be.
Yeah, I think Annie's right, and I mean I think the only thing I'd add to that is this idea of putting a human face on things and talking about we talk about signature experiences or hero moments. I mean sometimes those are when you don't have to do something, right? The band is something that you can wave around, and the little orbs are kind of cool. But you know the real payoff on this thing is, because I was part of the beta testing, is actually about the relevance of place. Like we never say that, right? Because who's only designers are going to get that, right? But that's the but the people the Imagineers grokked it right away, right? Yes.
It seems like a key component of the framework that you showed is encouraging people to think about problems in different ways. So how do you stimulate that on your teams and your client teams, and I guess for me specifically, how do you recommend we sort of bring that forward in our creatives?
I think you come to the workshop in an hour. That's my snarky answer, but basically, yeah. Do you want to?
Sure. I mean, I think there are lots and lots of ways to get inspiration. I think design thinking is. I'm so happy and pleased that it's this term and that people are learning about user design or user-centered research. Those are all incredibly valuable and critical things. I would also say that it's just another way to get inspired, and we, I think inherently as biological humans, are inspired by other humans. And so that, the power of that type of storytelling, when someone's telling you their experience one-on-one, you'd be surprised at how many executives on our client teams that we sit with who've sat through decks and decks and decks of pain points with statistics and numbers, and yeah, I've heard all those pain points before. But if you actually put them in front of a person who uses their product, or you show them a video and them talking about how painful it is to use it, you'd be surprised at how quickly things get done after that. So I do think it's almost like short-circuiting a little bit. It's a little bit of a shortcut to someone's heart a little bit, and understanding what you have to do to your business to make change. I think that's one thing, and I think that certainly companies like ours really relish and kind of love that process. I would say that at Frog, at least, the other way that we get inspired is, as you kind of saw by Patrick's talk, is we think a lot about what's happening in the market and whether those things are good or bad for people or their supply chains. And there are rich threads, endless threads internally about what other companies are doing, and a really healthy debate about whether that's good for the user, what are the downstream implications about 5 years, 10 years from now, talking to the guy who invented the Keurig K-Cup, massive success. That guy regrets even inventing those. It's they're not biodegradable. They're kind of this now anchor form factor. Other companies are starting to copy it. I really feel terrible about that, right? So I think we think about all of these other elements that inspire us to create the best solutions. And so I would say people and products. But that's my view. Everyone can get inspiration from anywhere.
Yeah, and I think it's also, the part that's interesting about this too is, to add to what Annie's saying, is putting a pen in people's hands is really empowering, and a lot of times we'll have business leaders that we're working with or people who run divisions or whatever, and we'll give them the pen and say, you draw it, you design it, you show us, and that forces them to think, and then it helps them understand what they don't know, but it also gets them to explore the part of their brain. I mean, I think it's probably true from a cognitive science perspective that when you actually start generating things yourself, you think differently. It's one thing to have a reductive discussion, right? And be able to zoom, 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 deduce. One of the things I had to unlearn coming to Frog was not to be so deductive, right? Think about what else is there. Okay. Did that help? What other questions? Yes?
How much of it is, are you a facilitator, working with them and having them develop on their own?
Yeah.
And how much of it is going to be plugging in a set of services that, okay, we're going to go out and do our things from that?
Yeah. We have frameworks and techniques. We have expertise in particular areas. The traditional things like visual design, industrial design, software, software architecture, org design. So we have those capabilities. We also, in some cases, have some vertical knowledge in particular industries. That said, I think we try to approach things from the perspective of a newbie. And so we do try to facilitate that. I would argue, I think in the spirit of what we just talked about, bringing everyone along ends up looking like facilitation. And a lot of times we walk out of the room and the client's like, well, we didn't need those guys. We could have done that ourselves. And somebody on their team's like, yeah, right. Why didn't you? Right? Why did it take these people coming in to talk to you about this stuff? And when they feel, when the idea disappears into the group, that's fantastic, right? There's no prima donnas. Thank you guys. Oh, thank you.